decisively as a Commonwealth. And as your Secretary-General, I mean to make it a priority for action. And I hope you think that today may be just the start of what we will do together. I know it's day 3, but I should have hurried a little more. We have to maintain the consensus and momentum generated at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Malta last November, when on the very eve of the Paris summit, our leaders acknowledged the urgency and heightened risk of the global threat confronting us. And this is not a new argument for the Commonwealth. Indeed, it was the Commonwealth who has been calling for collective action on this topic since 1989, when it adopted the Declaration on the Environment, and then in 1994, from the first global conference on the sustainable development of small island states, came the Barbados Programme of Action for the Sustainable Development of SIDS, long before Kyoto was even on the horizon. In 2009, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting held in Trinidad and Tobago did the Port of Spain Climate Change Consensus, and the Commonwealth Climate Change Declaration had a decisive impact on the eve of COP15 in Copenhagen. So this time, in advance of COP21, CARICOM in July of last year, with a focus on a target of limiting global rises in temperature to 1.5 degrees, and then in Papua New Guinea, the Pacific Island Forum also agreed. They made a commitment to work together at Paris to try and deliver 1.5. Then those 24 countries joined with the remainder of the Commonwealth when we went to Malta for the Heads of Government meeting immediately before Paris. There was an agreement that 53 of us would commit to 2 degrees, with 52 of us saying 1.5% would be our aspiration. So countries like Canada, that had been perhaps a little sceptical in the past, came on board because they heard the voice of the small island states in the Commonwealth. And the 53 countries then went to Paris, united in our aims and active across the 5 different regions. And we had members of the Commonwealth saying with one voice, take this seriously. And they did. So now, having been instrumental in achieving the Paris Agreement, the Commonwealth now has to be instrumental in delivering it. The agreement brings hope for a more united global approach, and although not all states were fully satisfied with the outcome, it is a major step forward. These important interventions show the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth countries being instrumental in bringing together our many small and vulnerable member states and uniting their voices in advocacy for action with those whose economies are larger and voice on the world stage much more powerful. This potent combination is a distinctive Commonwealth strength and advantage, and we will continue to provide smaller and more vulnerable states with a vital platform for wider political consideration of their concerns, not least in Europe, by the participation of our 3 EU members, namely the United Kingdom, Cyprus and Malta. And Malta, of course, now has the leadership in terms of Commonwealth, but also will soon have the presidency of the European Union. So it's a powerful European voice for the Commonwealth. It is supported by targeted programs of research, advocacy and capacity building to achieve greater resilience through sustainable development. And the challenge for all of us here and across the Commonwealth is we now need to move from agreement to action. There are a number of questions that we need to answer, which I hope that we will start to address during this dialogue today. For example, do we need to create a climate toolkit to deliver together on the COP21 agenda? What are the practical steps that ensure we can deliver what is not just an environmental challenge, but a health, wealth and development challenge too? Can we deliver a more symbiotic solution which is restorative and regenerative? How do we coordinate across the different agencies, departments, countries and entities? At their meeting in Malta, our heads of government approved the establishment of the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub that will help member states, particularly those with constrained capacity, gain access to much needed climate finance. This very practical initiative is an excellent example of Commonwealth cooperation and shows how we can together enable us to respond to the needs of a large number of small states within our membership, most of which are classified as small island developing states, the SIDS. This will be one of the range of the flagship Commonwealth programmes designed to support national efforts and build the resilience of small states and the least developed countries. I think it responds well to the need for our member states to move towards low-carbon, climate-resilient economies in order to achieve sustainable development and the challenges they face when seeking to finance such climate action. And we really are incredibly grateful to Mauritius for generously undertaking to host the Commonwealth Centre Finance Access Hub, and to both Mauritius and Australia for the financial support they have provided towards this initiative. And we hope others will follow their lead and will look forward to commitments from additional partners. This initiative is complemented by our established programme to build resilience and address the vulnerabilities of our members, particularly small states. But how do we better develop a climate impact assessment for policy development, for building regulations, for land use? Another question is, how do we ensure better coordination when disaster does strike? Commonwealth Connection helps build cooperation and capacity and leverages the critical resources to tackle climate change and for recovery and rebuilding following natural disasters. After Tropical Storm Erica, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency swung into action, showing not just a solidarity for one another, but a strategic capability so often missing around the world. Here at the Secretariat, we see ourselves having a vital role in linking regional institutions and partners across the Commonwealth. For example, the Caribbean Climate Change Centre in Belize, the South Pacific Regional Environmental Programme, the Indian Ocean Commission, and many other partners. But how do we best develop those sort of regional networks? Another Commonwealth initiative seeks to address the dual challenge of climate change and crippling high debt burdens faced by many of our member states. Our multilateral debt swap for Climate Action Initiative will involve an agreement between participating climate finance providers and debtor countries. It will reduce their public debt in exchange for a commitment to use debt repayments to finance local climate change projects. Now, the mechanism underpinning our Commonwealth debt swap proposal is simple. There is a huge pot of money, and that pot of money has been identified for climate finance resources. Now, we have an estimate of 331 billion US dollars, a similarly huge climate finance implementation gap of $70 billion, and at the same time, a persistent and unsustainable debt overhang in climate vulnerable countries. Our scheme will swap national debt for climate change action and has already gained considerable support, including the endorsement of the UN Secretary General. But I know we have more to do and more to deliver. These are the challenges, but these are the opportunities. And I look forward to hearing your ideas and hearing the contributions that I know each of you will make in order to assist us in making the implementation of COP21 a reality and not just a dream. And I thank each and every one of you for what you've already done on climate change, but much more importantly, I'm thanking you in advance for what you will do as a result of coming today to make sure we deliver that which we have promised. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Secretary General, for so vividly painting a picture on the impact of climate change on many of our jurisdictions. Tropical Storm Erica and its impact on Dominica, Hurricane Ivan 12 years ago and its impact on Grenada, more recently Cyclone Winston, and before that Cyclone Palm and its impact on Vanuatu. And also taking your time to put in context the historical and very important role of the Commonwealth in advocating for climate change, and also setting the stage in terms of an agenda, in terms of what we as a Commonwealth can and should do to deal and address climate change. It is said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So with your kind indulgence, we would like to show just a short video clip. The video clip, please.
It's not much, but it is a start. In the town of Levuka, soldiers from Fiji's capital have arrived and are starting to clear debris. There is an enormous job ahead. In some nearby villages, virtually every house has been destroyed. Many aren't waiting for the soldiers and have begun their own temporary repairs. But in a place where no one is insured, there is a common plea.
I need help from government to rebuild my house, so I can start my life again with my family.
The island of Ovalu was one of Fiji's prettiest. In 2014, Al Jazeera filmed here, along Levuka's old colonial main street. Then this, filmed from one of the strongest buildings in town. It gives some idea of the wind and the pounding waves. So Levuka looks different now. Every building has holes, some are without roofs. The port building has collapsed and churches are badly damaged. But it's the smaller villages that look the worst, shattered after a storm that hit Ovalau at lunchtime on Saturday and didn't pass until 7 in the evening.
6 solid hours. It's just like you tear an exercise book and you throw it into the wind. That's the roofing iron. It flew all around in this village.
In the remnants of another village were more stories of terror. About 40 people were sheltering in the community hall, that yellow building behind me. But when its roof was ripped off, they ran to the only other building still standing, the church. But look what happened to it. All but one of those inside ran out just before the collapse. The 72-year-old lady who couldn't was buried on Sunday, 50 metres from where she died. On Ovalau, 3 people were killed. For the living, establishing the basics is the priority. Many without homes are sleeping in schools. Schools won't be schools again here for weeks or months. Children's worlds have been turned upside down. Hundreds of students were evacuated out to Fiji's main island early on Wednesday. No one seems to have any idea of when they nor normal life will return. Andrew Thomas, Al Jazeera, on the island of Ovalau, Fiji.
Having seen that short video clip, it's my pleasure to invite His Excellency, the High Commissioner of Fiji, to share a country perspective. High Commissioner, please.
Secretary General, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues. First of all, let me thank the organizers for inviting the Fiji High Commission to be part of this distinguished forum. I guess the emergency is now. The solution to all this is now as well. The time for excuses is no more. All nations need to act decisively now as a matter of urgency. The impact of climate change is real. It is happening right now as we speak. Unless the world acts decisively in addressing the greatest challenge of our age, then the small island nations, particularly in the Pacific, is doomed. It is indeed really, really frightening. Cyclone Winston has been referred to by the Secretary General. Yes, it's easily one of the most testing in our nation's history. There was widespread destruction across various sectors of our economy and affected the livelihood of many Fijians. Weeks of drama, tragedy and heartbreak. We lost 44 of our people. Many, many more injured. Well in excess of 30,000 homes destroyed or damaged. The total damage bill amounting to hundreds of millions of Fijian dollars. The task of rebuilding Fiji, our homes, our schools, our infrastructure, our agriculture, to be rebuilt to a more high standard than we ever have in the past. This is the challenge today. All the planets of small island nations are uniting for this unprecedented campaign against climate change. Or else, in one day, we will all drown. This is the reality. Too often, the small island states are ignored and treated as bystanders. We are fighting hard today to be heard on climate change and the negative impact of the rising sea level. In fact, as I speak today, Fiji by and large has already commenced the relocation of 45 communities, and 830 have already been identified that are at risk. Fiji recently has experienced the worst, a severe drought that affected negatively our culture and farms. The cyclones that are now more frequent than ever are forming outside the known traditional seasons. This is scary. Severe flooding is currently hitting Fiji today, immediately after Cyclone Winston. In the last 24 hours, it is now confirmed that Cyclone Zina, which is Category 3, is now heading closer to Fiji Group. This is very, very scary and dangerous. Fiji and the Pacific Islands are now experiencing the impact of climate change big time. In 2012, as alluded to by the Secretary General, Cyclone Evan hit Fiji after creating damages in Tonga and Samoa, and Wallis and Fortuna. Last year, Cyclone Pam devastated Vanuatu, killing more than 20 people, and did a lot of damage to the infrastructure. Cyclone Tony also hit Samoa last year, together with heavy flooding, which created landslides and damaging infrastructure. The smaller island states in the Pacific today are bearing the full force of climate change. It is common knowledge that Fiji, led by our Prime Minister, has been very outspoken, together with other smaller island Pacific leaders, in encouraging everyone, that all nations, to do their part to reduce carbon emissions and control the production of greenhouse gases. The major developed wealthier nations must do more. The addressing of loss and damages is a huge challenge for anyone. We are indeed thankful to the international community for their continuous assistance and support for Fiji with a couple last weeks. Our government has made substantial investment in disaster preparedness and mitigation measures. This results in the timely distribution of relief materials and food items, as well as the better and efficient coordination with national, regional, and international partners. The financial contribution commitment made by our colleagues, Commonwealth colleagues, like the UK, Canada, and Australia, should be applauded. Such contributions to the Global Fund to deal with climate change will no doubt go a long way in encouraging other developed nations to do the same. The Green Climate Funds should be funded properly. Fiji is prepared to practice what it preaches. This week, our Prime Minister has signed the ratification of Paris Agreement on climate change. This instrument of ratification effectively reaffirms Fiji's commitment to combating the root causes of climate change and is being transmitted to New York. Everyone is urgently needed to rally behind the Paris Agreement so that we can combat the climate change challenges and help mitigating and resisting future natural disasters. It will be interesting to see how many other countries have remained true to their commitment in Paris in December. As for Fiji, we are already preparing to reduce our carbon emission by 30% in 2030. It's difficult for a small island like Fiji, but we are going to achieve this through increasing the use of renewable energy sources for power generation, hydro and solar, It is through the power of water and sun to drive our energy needs and reduce our reliance on diesel. Fiji has also developed a green growth framework with a heavy energy component which emphasizes on sustainable use of natural resources on land and on sea. And this is reflected today in our 5 and 20 years national development plan. Later this month, as we all know, leaders will have to meet in New York to formalize the ratification of the Paris Agreement on climate change. It has to be stressed that there has to be recognition of the fact that more is still needed to be done by industrialized countries. How we react and assess recovery and rehabilitate is critical. For Fiji, it is always a whole government approach. A partnership approach where all members of the community is involved. That is the civil society, the private sector, and the community as a whole. Also included is capacity building component, where capacity has been developed by our partners. We thank the EU for this assistance specifically. As for the future, an integrated approach is looked at addressing climate and disaster risk. Through the recently launched Green Growth Framework, Fiji is committed to developing its own national strategic plan for climate change and disaster resilience. Certainly with the Paris Agreement, it is a step in the right direction, where voices of all nations are heard. Nations are committed to the ratification of the agreements on climate change. But as stated earlier, more is still needed to be done by the weather nations to take away the threats. It has to be an inclusive approach, where no one is left behind. Fiji is still keen on having the global temperature rises be kept below 1.5 degrees rather than 2. Fiji is also calling on the Paris Agreement, if possible, to be legally binding on all parties. And that the climate change adaptation measures to be 100% grant financed. What can you expect from the Commonwealth Secretary today in supporting smaller member countries that are already feeling the impact of climate change? Having this high-level dialogue such as this today is a very, very good start, and we must thank the Secretary General. But I guess more needs to be done. Has always been echoed in the past. There's a lot of talk, but very little conversation and discussion regarding implementation of the Paris Agreement. I kindly ask that we need to champion this together, all of us in this room. Amongst the various priorities at the ComSec, this is the one, to my mind. We must think of the future of our global community, our children and grandchildren. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so very much, High Commissioner. I perhaps would just like to make one observation. I was living in the United States when Hurricane Katrina unleashed so much disruption. Hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. But yet still, Texas was operating at full steam. New York and the stock exchange, okay. California was fine. The difference between a larger geographic mass and a country like Fiji or Dominica or Grenada or Vanuatu, it's a stark difference. Because if you have a Hurricane Ivan or a Tropical Storm Erica or a Cyclone Winston or the cyclone that's coming now, Cyclone Zena, basically you are looking at damages that can almost destroy the entire economy. And I think this is the picture and this is the issue that was so clearly brought out by His Excellency the High Commissioner of Fiji. So thank you so very much. It gives me great pleasure in welcoming an extraordinary person with a very long and I dare say glorious career in public service, and a champion, and who has campaigned globally for climate justice. So please join me in warmly welcoming Her Excellency Mary Robinson.
Good morning. It's really a great pleasure to be with you. Secretary-General of Scotland, Sir David King, High Commissioner of Fiji. I really would like to thank the Secretary-General and congratulate her for bringing us together for this timely dialogue in her first week in office as Secretary-General. And may I also, Secretary-General, congratulate you as you embark on your new role. We have known each other, and I know you are a strong woman, and having a strong woman at the helm is very important. There is no doubt that the Commonwealth is a remarkable institution that's uniquely placed to give what I would call collective soft leadership on many of the issues that are very pressing for the world, including climate change. And it's good to have a strong woman at the helm. Maybe because I come from a neighbouring island, but a non-member of the Commonwealth, I can endorse what you said, Secretary-General, in your speech about the leadership that the Commonwealth has been given over quite a long period of time and must now give in order for us to have full implementation of the Paris Climate Agreement. In fact, what we have to do is to get into a mindset of 1.5 degrees, all of us, into that mindset. And then we'll know what actions we have to take. And I hope we can have a good dialogue about that. I will never forget the moment when the Paris Climate Agreement was adopted. French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius brought down his gavel, and the room erupted into loud cheers and clapping from hundreds of people. Many were in tears, and there was an overwhelming feeling that this was a moment of history. After years of painstaking work and many hard-fought agreements, over 190 countries came together to face the common challenge of climate change. They also showed how multilateralism, dialogue, and respect for the other's points of view can lead to common positions for the benefit of all. In the hours afterwards, I spoke of how the Paris Agreement was an agreement for humanity, and of how the call for climate justice from millions of people across the world had come into the negotiating rooms in Paris. I then flew back to Dublin in time to celebrate Christmas in Ireland. Over the holiday season, I thought a great deal about what had been agreed in Paris, as I spent some wonderful time with my 5 grandchildren. I was interested that the High Commissioner ended his talk by reference to children and grandchildren, and I want to begin mine by positioning the debate in that context. My grandchildren range in age from almost 2 to 12. They and their peers around the world are what Paris was really about. They will experience firsthand whether Paris was an essential breakthrough to stabilise our climate, whilst also dealing with the climate change that's already unavoidable, or whether it was a false dawn. I thought of how they will share their world with about 9 billion other people by 2050, and how the Paris Agreement will impact all of their lives. I asked myself then, and I ask myself frequently, what will the 9 billion people think about those of us who celebrated the Paris Agreement in December 2015? Their answer is not automatic or predetermined, and we have a lot more work to do if we want their judgment to be positive. While it's right to characterise Paris as an unprecedented success, we must also recognise that it is just the foundation on which we now need to build. It's quite a fragile foundation, which commits us to staying well below 2 degrees of warming, above pre-industrial levels, and working for 1.5 or below 1.5, but without strong, legally enforceable measures to achieve that. One positive outcome of Paris is that we now have a framework of intended nationally determined contributions, or INDCs. Almost all countries, as you know, have set out the climate outcomes that they predict their countries will be able to achieve before 2025 or 2030. Analysis concludes that even if all the INDCs were successfully implemented, they lead us to global temperature increases of more than 2.7 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Furthermore, many INDCs require conditions of action that are not yet in place, including meaningful action at scale on climate finance and support for developing country leadership. While the national commitments made on a voluntary basis in the lead-up to COP21 are not legally binding, the requirement to review and revise these upwards is, as are the provisions around transparency and accountability. What Paris has created is a legally binding pathway for climate action. The open question is whether this pathway will deliver action at the speed and scale needed to keep warming to 1.5 or well below 2 degrees. This is where the rules that will govern the implementation of the Paris Agreement are important. This will be the focus of work over the coming years under the UNFCCC. The rules on transparency are crucial so that a regime is created that enables oversight by governments, by civil society and citizens. The rules will need to be strong to bolster what is a non-punitive compliance mechanism under the Paris Agreement. Therefore, the urgent task for the years ahead, and starting now, is to use the framework created in Paris to boost the measures outlined in the INDCs and to continually inject yet more ambition into all climate actions, including those which are being pursued by subnational authorities and by business. We cannot feel satisfied until we have a credible path to a safe world and a clear understanding of how we're going to support those who are dealing with climate impacts that are already inevitable. We won't get there if we think that we can rely on one-size-fits-all global solutions. And in particular, we won't get there unless we successfully support the leadership that is coming from many of the peoples and governments of the developing world, including Fiji, as we heard. The idea that developed and developing countries have differing challenges is not always an easy one to discuss. But all involved in the Paris Agreement recognise that rich countries must create zero-carbon economies as quickly as possible by phasing out their high emissions. They've put most of today's stock of emissions in the atmosphere, and they have a responsibility to dramatically reduce their future emissions, and they can afford to do so. However, even if the developed world delivers deep decarbonisation more quickly, this won't be enough to achieve the zero-carbon world we need. This is because, as you know, most of the energy supply, buildings and transport infrastructure that is yet to be built, as well as most of the world's agriculture and major forests, are in the developing world. It's therefore in everybody's interest that the developing world is able to build low-carbon energy, transport and urban infrastructure, while also pursuing sustainable agriculture and forestry practices. Otherwise, these activities will become unacceptably high sources of emissions. The challenge is compounded by the reality that developing countries are also facing massive costs to deal with the impacts of climate change that are already occurring, as we've heard. And they have to do all that while faced with a whole array of other development challenges that put pressures on scarce public and private finances, such as education and healthcare, or the urgent need to pursue private sector-led growth and create jobs. Yet despite these enormous challenges, developing countries are showing leadership. I saw this myself throughout my time as the United Nations Special Envoy, Secretary General's Special Envoy on Climate Change. When I visited Samoa to attend the Small Islands Developing States Conference in 2014, I was struck by the leadership on climate change and on sustainable development more broadly of so many of the SIDS. I saw how those who lived and worked in SIDS are witnesses to the human impacts of climate change, and how lives and livelihoods can be damaged, how human rights and development gains can be undermined. This impression was reinforced when I was in Fiji last September for the Pacific Islands Development Forum, and saw how impossible it would be for the leaders of those islands to return back home after Paris without a commitment to keep open, staying below 1.5 degrees. I wasn't able, because we were sitting in the wrong place, to see the film you saw earlier, but I recognised some of the places, and I could imagine what the devastating impact of Cyclone Winston has been. I also saw how the small island Pacific states and other developing countries, large and small, are working out how to transition to low-carbon economies. Despite its climate challenges, which were made very clear by the High Commissioner of Fiji, he confirms that Fiji's determination to work on renewable energy, to take every step to ratify the Paris Agreement. Ethiopia aims to be middle income, achieve ambitious greenhouse gas emission reductions and invest in renewable energy by 2025, despite its backdrop as one of the world's poorest countries, with 74% of its population currently living without access to energy. Costa Rica is also a good example of a country transitioning to a low-carbon economy. In 2015, it achieved 99% renewable energy, and for a short period, 100%. In India, I saw a real seriousness of purpose about bringing electricity to 300 million citizens by 2019. That's about the same as the entire population of the United States of America, or 60% of the population of the European Union. And I have greatly admired both President Obama's climate leadership in the United States and the European Union's support for ambitious climate action over the years. But look at the INDCs of the United States and of the European Union, and you'll see that neither has anything close to the level of ambition that India is now pursuing. I'd make similar points about more countries in Africa, Asia, South America, the Pacific. And perhaps the most profound conclusion is that all these countries are seeking to do something that has never been done before, to deal with climate change and also to develop their economies without emissions. There is literally no advanced economy in the world that has done this. The Commonwealth, both as member states and as an institution, can help to support this leadership. Collectively, you comprise a third of the world's population, representing every continent, a quarter of the world's countries, 2 members of the G7, a quarter of the G20, one of the world's 2 biggest emitters, 31 small states, 27 small island developing states, and 13 of the least developed countries. I've been doing my homework, Secretary General. As importantly, the values on which the Commonwealth is founded provide important guidance for collaborative action, ensuring that all countries and all people are treated fairly and with dignity. And you have a good track record. Successive CHOGMs from the Port of Spain in 2009 through Colombo in 2013 and Malta in 2015 achieved political breakthroughs as heads of government level, which catalysed greater global actions. When I addressed the Commonwealth foreign ministers in Malta last November, I suggested that as well as these political breakthroughs, there are 2 areas where the Commonwealth can make a major practical contribution. Firstly, you can ensure an inclusive and rights-based process as climate action progresses. And secondly, you can continue to support innovative solutions on climate finance. By facilitating an inclusive process, I mean ensuring that genuine debate and problem solving is taking place, which gathers in viewpoints of those giving leadership in the developing world. You can make a unique contribution to dealing with the frequent mismatch between northern viewpoints of climate solutions and southern viewpoints, because you recognise the power of homegrown solutions, even if they don't adhere to theoretical models created elsewhere. Your diversity means you can look out for each other to ensure that the voices and perspectives of smaller and less powerful countries are heard throughout. On finance, you can help to deal with the reality that discussions about international climate finance often become politicised. In particular, when talk turns to the $100 billion in climate finance that the developed world has committed to mobilising, this can become a negative conversation without accounting, or a defensive conversation about ensuring that climate finance is not simply international public finance that may be taken away from education or health. These perspectives should not be ignored because they too are the real experiences of developing countries. For example, despite strong action from some developed countries on overseas development assistance, including the remarkable leadership shown by the United Kingdom by putting into law a commitment to provide 0.7% of GNI for overseas development assistance, global ODA has decreased in real terms in recent years. So we must understand why developing countries react negatively to being told that climate finance from ODA has increased. Instead of a continual argument about ODA, the climate finance conversation can become a positive conversation about finding genuinely new ways to support public and private leadership. Issues such as debt sustainability, the financing challenges created by achieving middle-income status, and the practical challenges to attracting low-cost private capital. All of these issues impact on the ability of developing countries to take ambitious climate action. But they're not always fully aired in the conversations about climate finance, despite being issues that would enrich that conversation in a very practical way. And there are, as Secretary-General Scotland said, areas where the Commonwealth is already making meaningful contributions. At the CHOGM in Malta and at COP21, some of the most innovative solutions on climate finance emerged from the Commonwealth, including, as we've heard, the establishment of the Commonwealth Climate Finance Hub and the Commonwealth Initiative on debt swaps for climate action, both of which were in response, of course, to the needs of developing countries. To conclude, I would remind us all that Paris ended a remarkable year for the international community, including agreement on the Sustainable Development Goals. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development called for an approach that, and I love this phrase, reaches the furthest behind first. Reaches the furthest behind first. And the Paris Agreement commits us to prioritising the most vulnerable countries and people. In designing the global response to climate change, we have an opportunity to eradicate extreme poverty, ensure access to clean energy for all, and achieve equitable access to sustainable development. This is an opportunity we obviously can't afford to miss. My 5 grandchildren and the other 9 billion people with whom they will share this planet will look back on 2015. If they conclude that it was the year which started us on a pathway to eliminate extreme poverty and inequality and transition to a zero-carbon economy, that will be a legacy of which we can all be proud. And I think the questions that you posed earlier, Secretary-General Scotland, are the very questions that we need to have a dialogue about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Your Excellency, Mary Robinson. We now have the pleasure of hearing from another global leader and advocate on climate change. And we have with us Sir David King, who is the UK Foreign Secretary's Special Representative for Climate Change and has been working on this issue for many years and is indeed one of the global leaders. So David, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you. And first of all, congratulations to Secretary-General Scotland, not only for starting us off in such a dynamic way, but for starting us off so quickly into her appointment. I'm going to pick up on the theme of grandchildren. I only have 2, Mary, but if I could say my youngest is 2 years old next week. Let us suppose she's a historian when she is an adult. What will she say about that agreement in Paris? Will it have turned out to be a piece of paper which hasn't really had an impact? Or is it going to be that 12-15 is the turning point when nearly 200 nations finally, and a bit late, reached an agreement that we need to handle the biggest challenge, I'm going to say the biggest challenge not only of our generation, the biggest challenge our civilization has ever had to face up to. And I say the biggest challenge because it's the biggest challenge where we've always all had to work together against the same challenge, and where the challenge is actually threatening our future civilization. Now, I can't see the screen, but I don't know if I've got a PowerPoint up there. I have, so I'm going to have to guess as we go along. Is it possible that you can hear me if I walk away from the microphone, or is this needed for recording? Yeah, it's needed for recording. I'll play a guessing game. So we're going to turn it a little bit. Even if I get a clue as to what the first slide is, it would be better. So the first slide is simply a slide that I developed when I was Chief Scientific Advisor. We had in 2003 I think you can ignore that for the moment. I'll talk you through it. In 2003, in Central Europe, we experienced the worst heat wave on record in Central Europe. And it's represented by a little black cross in that tiny diagram. Now, the point about that severe heat wave was that it was the most serious calamity in terms of the number of fatalities that Europe has ever experienced from a natural phenomenon. Around 70,000 excess fatalities occurred during that heat wave. And the question was, is that at all climate change driven, or was it just one of those extreme events? Now, the deep analysis that was presented about a year later supported the notion that this was very heavily driven by the underlying change in the climate. And here's where I need to point out something that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is so good, has missed out on, which is extreme weather events, when they're sitting on a rising background, become more extreme. And so 1947 was the previous hottest summer in Central Europe, and this one was had much greater impact, much higher temperature. And the reason is because the baseline temperature was now higher. So when we have a very extreme summer in Central Europe, yes, we have a large number of fatalities. Now here's the sort of frightening piece about my curve. I asked our people in the Hadley Centre to run their model backwards in time, and that's what you see in red, just to see if the black line, which is the observation of the hot temperatures in Central Europe, can be described by the theories that are being used by climate scientists. And you can see, I think, that the red lines show a pretty good description of the previous behavior of the temperature in Central Europe summer. Then you run forward in time with the same model, and this is on a medium to high emissions scenario, which is exactly what we're on, and you'll see that by 2050, the average Central European temperature will be the same as that extreme hot summer in 2003. Therefore, if we have an extreme hot summer in 2050, it's already sitting on this very high baseline. And that is the challenge of climate change. It's not just the average temperature, it's not just the average sea level, it's what happens when you have an extreme weather event sitting on this higher level. And my worry in 2002 was that in Britain, we too are an island nation, the British Isles. And we also will suffer from rising sea levels. And so I started a big program of work to look at flood risk to the United Kingdom and what adaptation was needed for the United Kingdom. And we reported that to Parliament in 2003. That report had more impact on the British actions on climate change than any other report. We got all-party agreement to take action. We started spending £250 million on coastal defences, but also inland flood defences. When we had the worst floods in our history, 2012, 2013, I can say I wasn't saying, yes, I predicted that. I was saying, thank goodness we invested in the adaptation, in the resilience, because the overall cost was about £500 million, but without what we had been doing, it would have been considerably more, quite possibly 50 to 200 billion pounds of damage. Because what we did was make sure that the flood waters never threatened any of our major assets. It's true, we had to send the water somewhere, and it went into what we had designated as flood plains. And so the people living in those villages, of course, suffered, but London didn't suffer any of the floods. So the point I'm making here is we have the modeling capability to deliver for every country in the world the kind of modeling that we did in 2003 to 2004. We have that ability to deliver. It is expensive, and it needs to be done for each region of the world. And then we need to develop resilience, because climate change is with us. Whatever the outcome of the agreement in Paris to decarbonize the global economy, we still have climate change impacts with us, so we need to develop our resilience. Now, if I could have the next slide. You can just read the title here, and that's all I want you to read. After Paris, in that moment of elation, it was 21 years of negotiating to reach that moment, I wrote this opinion editorial for the international journal Science. And they published it on January the 8th, and they put the heading on there, and I quite like the heading. The opportunity of our age, the biggest opportunity of our age. And what I actually said there was, in terms of linking the technology developments that are happening in response to the need to decarbonize our economy, we are seeing the biggest opportunity for wealth creation, because what is already emerging into the marketplace are new technologies which can be brought into the marketplace to manage to replace the old carbon-based technologies. And for any country that grasps that, that is the direction of travel into the future. Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, made one of the most important speeches in Paris. What he effectively warned was that the next big debt crisis will be because the banks are misreading the future. They're continuing to give AAA ratings to the fossil fuel industry to continue investing in their area. He said those are going to be bad debts because in the future, as we decarbonize, they're not going to be able to use those facilities that they're investing in now. So he's worried that the next big international financial crisis will be driven by a new kind of debt, the unusable facilities that will be constructed unless the banks realize that AAA ratings need to go into the renewable energy, the clean energy sector that is emerging. So the biggest opportunity of our age is this switch from, and let me say it, dirty fossil fuels. If we go into Beijing, if we go into Delhi, if we go into any country that is relying heavily on fossil fuels, we find that the air we breathe is not the healthy air that we would like to be able to breathe. And so there's a second reason for decarbonizing our economies, and that is to clean up the urban environment. 85% of Brits live in cities, and we are also suffering from urban air environment. So as we move forward, the biggest opportunity is all the co-benefits that come from managing this enormous challenge. Can I have the next slide? What I now want to dwell on, we know what the big outcomes were in Paris. We know that we committed ourselves to not more than 2 degrees, if possible 1.5. Very good. I was pushing for that myself, although many people think it's unrealistic. It's also unrealistic to face the dangers of even going towards 2 degrees centigrade. That's why I think we have to really work hard on that commitment. We also know the commitment towards $100 billion a year was made and confirmed at that meeting to go into the less developed countries in the world to assist in both adaptation and mitigation. We also know that loss and damage was dealt with, but was not dealt with a very significant outcome. But what I wanted to dwell on now was the other things that have been happening over 21 years at these meetings, at which many thousands of people have been gathering. So in the sidelines, we see the New York Forest Declaration. This was a commitment by the British government working with the Norwegian and the German governments together to create a fund which is approximately £6 billion, to be spent with forested nations that also signed up to the agreement. And that agreement commits countries of the world with forests joining up with us to manage avoided deforestation so that by 2030 there's no further deforestation of natural forests anywhere in the world, and that by 2030 we will have created a further reforested area equal to the size of India. If you say, well, that's also very ambitious, isn't it? I said, no, it's needed. We need these new forests to act as new carbon sinks. A new forested area the size of India around the world is doable. And if we do it, we will have achieved a new carbon sink which is equal to the emissions from the United States today. Now, I'm not suggesting we leave the United States emitting, but what I am suggesting is we need to get to carbon dioxide neutrality, and we need to get there quickly, and we're only going to achieve it if we have more carbon sinks. And so this program, to achieve that by 2030, is an essential part of that at least 2 degrees centigrade commitment that was made. The next point on my list here is the expansion of carbon pricing. And I'm not going to go into that. We're into a bottom-up process emerging from Paris, and carbon pricing is now spreading from the European Union. It's going right across China. By next year, it's already in 7 parts of China today. It'll be right across China. And we're already talking to China about joining together the EU trading scheme and the Chinese trading scheme. I hope that happens. But these bottom-up processes mean that carbon pricing will begin to emerge around the world at a faster rate and at higher prices, and that can only help to drive the transition that we need. I think importantly from the point of view of this gathering is the UK-USA agreement that was reached in Paris, again in the sidelines. We had developed a policy we called Energy Africa, the large aid budget that we have, which is currently about $17 billion this year, enables us to work in the developing world, and in particular least developed countries, to assist in all aspects of development. But we cannot distinguish between managing resilience against climate change and development. And so what this commitment is concerned with is to roll out clean energy across Africa. We've heard about the 300 million people in India who will be reached as a result of Modi's commitment. Our commitment is to assist every government in Africa that approaches us and shows a genuine commitment to work with us on this, to roll out clean energy to 620 million people in Africa who currently have no access to any electricity. We can make that commitment precisely because you roll out renewable energy, which is distributed, is very, very fit for purpose for small villages that are far from grids. It's going to be 2 or 3 times cheaper to roll out renewable energy to those villages than to extend the grids and the power systems. And India is experiencing exactly the same. So we've arrived at the point, as a result of the collapsing prices of renewable energy installation around the whole world, that it's cheaper to install renewable energy anywhere in the world than fossil fuel, cheaper or equal to. And if you're looking forward in time, it's obvious which investment should be made. So that commitment, we discovered the US had set up a Power Africa agreement, and so we put the two together and said, between the US and Britain, we will roll out, provided the countries in Africa come to us. And then finally, mission innovation. I'm going to try and race through the slides. Can I just get the attention of the person in control of the slide? Making notes and turning slides is quite a challenge. I just want to say a word about the direction of travel. Right? So this is a very simple diagram that I've been using for some time. In red is the International Energy Agency's emissions trajectory for the whole world as billions of tons of carbon dioxide emitted per annum as a function of time, and this curve goes from 1990 to 2035. We cannot stay on that red trajectory if we are going to manage this problem. We should be on the green trajectory. Now that's a sketch of what we need to be doing. The next slide is going to show, in a rather more complicated form, the same curve. And what you see in this more complicated form is actually the analysis of the outcome of the nationally determined contributions all added together. What you see in yellow at the bottom is the Chinese contribution. The next contribution is, actually I can't read it. It's India, then we get to in red, USA, etc. So we've got each of the contributions there. The top contribution is the one I want to draw attention to. That's land use. That top contribution essentially corresponds to ongoing deforestation. Well, that's the most important part of land use change. And so the biggest change going forward in time is what I've just been referring to. It's the avoided deforestation program. But all of the commitments made in Paris together amount to a fairly small reduction in total carbon dioxide emission. Small, close to zero, but land use change, the biggest change overall. Now, if you then go from 2030, which is the end point of most contributions made by countries, and you accelerate the curve going downwards, that analysis indicates a 3 to 4 degrees centigrade trajectory. So I have to say the 2.7 degrees from the IPCC is a very optimistic projection going forward. Now, I've also shown, we show here on the left, the curve going down gives us a 50% chance of staying at 1.5 degrees. Now, what that curve shows is that by 2035, we need to be carbon dioxide neutral. By 2035, 1.5 degrees is saying we need to have decarbonized the global economy and created these new forests I'm referring to. If we take the next two curves, they correspond to two different analyses of, again, a 50% chance of hitting a 2 degree centigrade world. And you even see there that we need to hit that 0 point before 2050. So when the G7 heads of government on June the 8th last year made that tremendous commitment to defossilize, they said, we are committed to decarbonizing the global economy during the course of this century. This analysis is showing us we will need to be doing it during the course of the first half of this century. So we've got a very, very big job on our hands to manage this to a 2 degrees centigrade or better world. We need to be very much better off than where those nationally determined contributions stand. If I could have the next slide. So how do we manage this? This also happened outside the agreement in Paris, but I think it's a critically important agreement. It was called the Global Apollo Program, and a group of us here in Britain, outside government, so this was myself, Richard Layard, the well-known economist from the London School of Economics, and Gus O'Donnell, formerly head of the civil service, were the main people who really worked this out. The Global Apollo Program was launched on the first day of the Paris Agreement in the evening, with on the platform launching it President Obama, Prime Minister Modi, Prime Minister Cameron, and Hollande, the President of France. So we had those four up there launching it, but 20 countries were committed to the program. If I come to the next slide, it no longer is called the Global Apollo Program, it's called Mission Innovation. Prime Minister Modi didn't like my choice of the phrase Global Apollo Program and changed it to Mission Innovation. And that's fine. Mission Innovation it is. And it will amount to a global program of research, development, and demonstration publicly funded by each of the 20 countries, amounting in total to $20 billion a year of publicly funded thrust of activity to develop all of the low-carbon technologies that we need to roll out into the marketplace. To develop them, I mean to de-risk them so that the private sector can then pick up on the most promising of those technologies and deliver them into the marketplace. A group of wealthy individuals led by Bill Gates, then came along to Paris on the same day, 29 of them, committing about up to $20 billion of their own private money. Bill Gates promised $1 billion as an investment into the new technologies that emerge. So this is the investment that will allow small companies to be spun off out of the research. Now, what I believe will happen out of this is that by the time we get to about 2025 or 2030, the technologies needed, smart grids, energy storage, all the technologies needed to go along with wind turbines, solar photovoltaics and so on, will all be available in the marketplace cheaply. So the key incentive is to provide clean energy for all countries of the world cheaper than we're currently getting with fossil fuel energy. Because if we get to that point, the transition to decarbonize is going to happen very much more rapidly. My next slide, and I am now just saying a key factor of what has already been delivered is the collapse in clean energy prices of all kinds. And I'm just showing a whole collection here. The top one is wind turbines. The bottom one is light-emitting diodes. It has now become cheaper for every country to install light-emitting diodes into their streets. They consume considerably less electricity, they're much more effective, and they have a longer lifetime now. So what we are achieving through these learning curves is technologies that are becoming competitive in the marketplace with the old fossil fuel-based technologies. And the next slide, I'm just going to run through. No, I'm going to skip the risk assessment, however much I'd like to work on it. I think I am running out of time. So next slide, and the next, and the next. Sorry about this, and the next. I'm just going to give some, that was me at the Pacific Islands Forum saying I thought the island states were right to aim for 1.5 degrees. The next slide. After Paris, we have a 9.6 gigawatt commitment from the South African government to build solar energy in the Kalahari Desert. The Indian government, 175 gigawatts of renewable energy is Prime Minister Modi's commitment by 2022. That's a tremendous ambition, but I think also a tremendous opportunity. India may well emerge as the country that leads the way in the direction of clean energy. The next few slides, if I could just ask you to, that's energy storage on a large scale, but I'm going to skip that. I'm just going to jump through this and go to the next slide. How do we get freight around the world more effectively than we're getting around at the moment and not using fossil fuels? This is a British company building, they're called Varialift airship, building a new airship. They are constructing their first one. This is a Photoshop of what they're hoping will emerge. This airship is about 175 meters long. It's about 70 meters wide. It's made of aluminium, the same as a Boeing today. Inside that are 12 helium bags. When it's resting on the ground, the helium bags are empty. On board is a helium cylinder. You want to raise the airship, you release helium into the bags and the airship goes up. You want to lower the airship, you pump the helium out of the bags back into the cylinder and the airship comes down. That has cost almost no energy at all. This airship is designed to carry about 200 to 250 tons of freight, considerably more than you can take in a wide-belly Boeing. Right? How does it move? Well, its vast area becomes an advantage. You take it up to 30,000 feet, it's covered in solar photovoltaics, and those engines are electric engines, and it then simply travels across to its destination. It doesn't use any fuel at all. It's using sunlight. And because of its vast area, it has a large enough intersection with the sunlight that it can travel at about 340 kilometers an hour. Right. In Europe, we bring tomatoes from Spain to Britain using wide-belly Boeings. If you did it with this, the cost would be down massively. And the question then is, what about the time for delivery? Well, actually, you don't have to land this thing. You can simply lower the freight to the ground from the air. It's got a crane on board. You have containers. It has 18 containers just as a ship on board. You can lift the containers into the hold from the air and you can lower them down to the ground. Imagine how that will transform the lives of people in island states. Imagine how that will transform the lives of people across Africa. You don't have any infrastructure need for the transport on the ground or on the sea. You just travel in straight lines. I believe in the future we, human beings, will also be moving around in the air in these vehicles. Now, I'm just showing you this because the technologies that are emerging are extremely exciting. There are many, many of them, and the mission innovation I mentioned is a big driver for bringing these through into the marketplace. If you take that disaster, because we started this discussion around disasters in Haiti, when the airport was destroyed, here's the vehicle you would want to go in with all of the freight on board in the rescue operation. You don't need the airport in operation in order to deliver the people who are needed and the medical supplies and so on. So I'm just suggesting that this big challenge we're faced with brings with it massive opportunities to improve our well-being. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Sir David. I think we'll have one round of questions and we'll ask our panelists to respond. So if you can kindly introduce yourselves and ask the questions. I recognize the High Commissioner from Bangladesh.
Madam Secretary General, I congratulate you for such a wonderful program today. It's at the very beginning of your taking over. And we had the distinct pleasure and privilege to work with Mary Robinson in Geneva when she was in our panel for climate change and justice. Sir David King, I had the pleasure with other ambassadors to join him before Paris Agreement to assure him that we are with you. Haiti, High Commissioner, either anybody comes to you or not, but we are always with you and will remain with you in these trying times. But I'm suggesting, Madam Secretary General, that definitely you expressed your deepest commitment, make it that it is existential. And in your maiden speech in this building, you said that you'll do whatever you can do. Our leaders joined the Commonwealth Secretary General in Malta for a declaration or an action plan on climate. It is evident. We joined in Paris, either small or big, but as a representative of the small and vulnerable countries, LDCs, or a critically vulnerable countries, ambassador, High Commissioner, I'm saying that we all are for this agreement in Paris, either we liked it or not. We joined it, and we'll continue joining and ratifying it either in New York or in our individual capitals. But my point is that, Secretary General, you deeply encouraged us, showing a kind of a statistics that more than 300 billion is a huge fund that is offering. We are deeply encouraged. We are encouraged seeing the presentation of Sir David that there's a huge research. But David, I would like to assure you that Bangladesh from Asia, and I'm sure Caribbean High Commissioners and Pacific High Commissioner would like to join your Africa campaign for the green energy. Please include us. And my point is, we need to talk now on the basis of the document. Yes, we are emotional sometimes. There's a huge gap of commitments and implementation. I'm not going to that. But there is an agreement. Now it has to be operationalized, implement. You said that you already kicked off because you started with Dominica with a disaster project. Wonderful, we congratulate you. And Madam Secretary General, just one day before you joined, 30th and 31st, there was an expert committee meeting. So they have identified the thematic priorities in terms of mitigation, adaptation, technology development and transfer, capacity building, INDCs, and implementation, a lot of areas. And these thematic priorities definitely reflects the issues has to be prioritized by the top leadership of each and every countries of the membership. So I would like to urge upon you, if you have any plan to engage us in this journey, we are definitely available, but we cannot be different from the thematic priorities already outlined by the technical committee under the agreement. But if there is an additionality, we would like to see in terms of finance, in terms of capacity building, advocacy, we are at you at the journey. Madam Mary Robinson, I am coming to you. You have a global campaign for climate justice. And this justice word makes me thrilled. You spoke almost our script today. I don't need to say anything. It is our script you just explained. So from the climate justice point of view and the commitment of our very beloved new Secretary General who is fully committed and energized, how the Commonwealth can contribute. If you kindly advise us how the High Commissioners in London or the member countries can be prepared to join the leadership of the new Secretary General to combat or address the challenges of the climate change in terms of her mandate and the mandate laid down in Paris Agreement. And are all these elements are doable? I mean, what the thematic priorities outlined by this expert committee. We found always fund, predictability, availability, access problem. Technology never transferred. There are a lot of innovations there, but we cannot touch it. We are simply climatically vulnerable. Day-to-day struggle our leadership have, for food, for health, for in our survival. But globally, it is also existential. We saw the emotional speech of the High Commissioner of Fiji. So in that context, Madam Mary Robinson, if you have your personal advice that how we can be fully engaged to make whole thing operationalized in terms of implementing the ambition we have created. Thank you.
Thank you so much, High Commissioner. Perhaps we can get just one short intervention, Scott.
Thank you, Dan. Scott Proudfoot from the Canadian High Commission. It's quite right that most of our attention has focused on carbon dioxide, which after all counts for the lion's share of climate change, and recognizing that Canada is joining with others in investing billions in helping developing countries transition to low carbon economies. At the same time, it is important not to lose sight of the effect of other greenhouse gases, which are disproportionately powerful. And I wonder if Sir David or others could comment on the necessity to phase out HFCs and so forth.
Thank you so much, Scott. I think we should be closing shortly, and I would like to ask Sir David King to respond and provide any final comments you may have, followed by Mary Robinson, our High Commissioner from Fiji, and our Secretary General thereafter. So David, please.
So very quickly, let me take on the point that's just been made. Yes, of course, we should be talking always about carbon dioxide equivalent, and that includes CFCs, it includes methane. And methane emissions are really twofold, and they are very serious, both of them. One is, of course, from leakage from any production of oil, tends to have methane leakage. We are still flaring an enormous amount of methane around the world. But worse than that is the leakage without flaring, because methane is a more serious greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide by a factor of 17. So I think what however, is more difficult And by the way, fracking methane leakage is a very serious issue there. What I would want to dwell on, though, is methane from cattle, sheep and pigs, where that is a particular ongoing problem. The government of New Zealand, as I'm sure you're aware, and the government of Denmark have been undergoing extensive and exhaustive studies of how to reduce methane emissions from these animals, and being quite successful. As you reduce emissions, the food they eat, instead of going into methane production, goes into milk or meat production, so it becomes a more effective animal as well. But we need much better animal husbandry as well, where the methane is captured. All of these have to be tackled as we go forward in time. Net zero greenhouse gas emissions is the target.
Thank you so much, Sir David. Your Excellency, Mary Robinson.
Well, I thank the High Commissioner of Bangladesh for his question, and indeed for recognising the central role of a climate justice approach, as I certainly do. There is a great injustice, and we've heard evidence of it at this meeting, that it does affect the poorest countries and poorest communities more severely already. It will affect more broadly, but just that injustice, and therefore there's a sort of need to make sure that those that are more vulnerable also have access to the benefits of climate change, and those benefits include access to renewable energy. So I think the focus on Africa is extremely important. I'll be at the next meeting of the African Development Bank in Zambia in May, where there will be a lot of discussion of this. I also feel, Paris could be described as having been a climate justice agreement because the poorest and most vulnerable to climate were listened to. The Climate Vulnerable Forum, the high ambition coalition at the end, which had the most vulnerable countries and the heaviest emitters hand in hand, coming in arm in arm. I mean, this was really significant. We have to keep that up. We need the solidarity of understanding the different pressures. And I have tried to capture those pressures of developing countries because they are exceptional. And, it's good news that solar energy is coming down, that there are these projects. But as you say, they are not reaching those who most need to have them now. We're not seeing enough of the transfer of technology. We're not seeing enough of the innovative financing. And so I think we need to understand that if we're going to really make that difference, we need a mindset that says we've committed to be at 1.5 or as close as possible. That's the safest pathway for the future as well, for the children who are born now who will live for 100 years in the developed parts of the world. And therefore they live right through all of this cycle and more. And so I feel that the more we can widen the circle of engagement to make this a responsibility for everyone. I mean, I was very impressed by a simple project in Australia, and I went to visit it again. I followed it for the last about 10 years. It's the 1 Million Women Project. And they are making a collective commitment to reduce the carbon emissions of these individual women in order to help Australia to meet its target. In the developed world, we should be doing this everywhere, making that commitment to reducing, because it's not just governments that have to, and industry, it's everyone. And that's really the climate justice approach, is a kind of people-centred and a focus on the most vulnerable, and the kind of, the sort of passion for the subject that the Secretary-General has shown here this morning. It's in her first week. This is what she's prioritising. That's what we need to hear, and we need to hear it not just in governments of the Commonwealth, but actually in the civil society, in the National Human Rights Commissions, in all of the structures of the Commonwealth, so that it really makes a difference.
Thank you so very much. High Commissioner, any final comments?
Well, firstly, I want to reiterate my thanks for the most fantastic contributions that we've had from our panellists, not least from the High Commissioner from Fiji, who I think gave us a very graphic example why this is something that we have to grasp now, and why there is no time to waste. And we only have to remember what happened in Pakistan just days ago. So none of us know which one of us are next. And I think it's absolutely critical that we are here together sharing this. But if I can take the questions asked first, I think the whole purpose of us having this meeting, to our colleague and dear High Commissioner from Bangladesh, is that we need a one-stop shop. We need an integrated pathway where instead of people scrambling around saying, what can I do next, we integrate the best practice that we have all over the world and we create a toolkit for implementation. And one of the reasons I think I'm so thrilled that we're doing this now at the very beginning is we want everybody's best ideas. And if we just look and remember the wonderful opportunities that have been identified and just touched upon briefly, and I'm sure all of us would have wanted Sir David King and Mary Robinson and our Fiji High Commissioner to go on much longer, because this is a start of a conversation, not the end. If we think about some of those new innovations, the variable lift airship, now who doesn't want to fly on that? We have a real opportunity, an exciting opportunity, that this climate change challenge can be met by our human ingenuity. I was thinking, as David was talking about his grandchildren, I was thinking about my parents, born in 1919 and 1912. Who would have believed in 1912 we would have all this information on an iPhone? Who would believe that our children would have them constantly stuck to their ear and have hands which will come out like this from now on with extended thumbs? So we're living in a very different world, but there's an opportunity for innovation. And I think that what we've heard today is an opportunity for us to create a symbiotic solution which is restorative and regenerative and innovative, not just looking at how we deliver COP21, but how do we deliver zero? And the excitement and the wealth that will create. So that's our answer. I'm absolutely sure that we won't do it on our own, that we can't do it on our own, but I'm absolutely clear we can do it together. And I love the fact that Her Excellency Mary Robinson reminded us of the 1 million women project. We have 51% of women in this world, and they are half the sky. So let's encourage them to lift their load. There is lots of work for us to do. Can I just say how wonderfully pleased I am that we have this opportunity to emulate the R&D that's been created by nature over the last billion years. Nature, nurture, and human activity, innovation. I think we need to say, here comes the Commonwealth. Thanks very much.
Thank you so very much, Secretary General. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, there's nothing more that I can say except please join me in expressing our deep appreciation to this distinguished panel. Yeah? And this is the start of a journey, and as a Commonwealth, we commit to supporting your efforts. And let's continue the conversation and networking over a light lunch. Thank you so very much for coming.